Hi, my name's Rachel Hills, and I've spent the better part of the last 10 years talking to people about sex. Specifically, I've spent the better part of the last 10 years studying the stories that circulate in our culture when it comes to sex, and how those stories work to inscribe and shape our perceptions of how and what sex should be. I've spoken to hundreds of people across the United States, the UK, Canada and Australia about what they think they should be doing when it comes to sex, where those ideas come from, and how they impact the way that people feel about their own sex lives. And based on those conversations, I've come to the conclusion that sex is, if not unnecessary, that was just me being cheeky, then at least a little overrated in our culture. Now, when I say sex is overrated, I'm not talking about how good it feels. I'm not saying that there's too much sexual content in our media or that Miley Cyrus should wear more clothing in her next video clip. And I'm certainly not saying that you should not have sex. Rather, I'm commenting on all the things that sex stands in for in our society. And we live in a society in which sex stands in for an awful lot. For how attractive we are, for how much we desire, or even how much we love the person that we're in a relationship with, for whether we are good, respectable, moral people, or alternatively, whether we are modern, enlightened, or liberated. We live in a culture that tells us that how often and with whom we have sex says something very important, not just about what we value, but of how valuable we are. And today I want to argue that perhaps if we were to place less emphasis on sex, if we were to make it, say, less necessary to our sense of self-worth, we would not only be happier people, we would probably also have better sex lives. Allow me to explain. Social scientists argue that sex is afforded a kind of special status in Western culture, that it is positioned as something that is more transcendent, more powerful, a source of more authentic truth than anything else that humans engage in. On the one hand, we're told that sex is pretty incredible, that it is the greatest of all human pleasures, and that it is this glue that bonds us to our partners. We're told that it is the rite of passage that transforms us from naive adolescents into knowing adults. And we're told that if sex is something that you could be doing right now, you would be a fool or a bore or a prude to choose to do anything else. On the other hand, we're told that sex is dangerous, that it can get you pregnant or give you an STI, that it's not polite to talk about in public, that if you go about it in the wrong way, say before you're married or with too many people or with somebody of the wrong gender, then you have the potential not just to destroy yourself, but to destroy the very fabric of our society. What makes sex most special, though, is the idea that if you know how somebody has sex, you can tell something very important about who they are. So if someone isn't sexually active, for example, that means they must be uptight, or worse, unfuckable. That if you're into BDSM, you must be violent, or you must be not in touch with your emotions, or both of those things at the same time, like Christian in 50 Shades of Grey. That if you have sex with too many people, especially if you're a woman, you're not worthy of love or respect. Now, this is a lot of symbolic weight to invest in one act. And it means that when our experiences of sex don't align with what we've been told they should be, whatever that might be in our individual social circle or subculture, we feel it in a more intense way than we do when we don't live up to the ideal in other areas of life. Of all the people I spoke to while I was working on my book, The Sex Myth, it was Henry whose story illustrated this best. When I met Henry in the spring of 2012, he was 23 years old and a virgin. I was living in London at the time, and he was living in a city a couple of hours away, and he'd caught the train in, especially to do the interview with me. That's how keen he was to share his story. But once we were sitting across from one another, Henry clammed up. He was deeply uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't sexually active. It made him feel undesirable, like some kind of hopeless social case that no one would ever want or love. A few months after we met, Henry was feeling more hopeless about his situation still. He wrote me an email saying that he was embarrassed that he'd spoken to me. Not because he'd revealed information about himself that made him vulnerable, although he had certainly done that, but because he felt that having reached out to me in the first place suggested that deep down he believed that he would have sex someday, that he was somehow deserving of it. And he did not feel that way anymore. As he wrote to me, "I've come to the conclusion that some people just aren't meant for it. And as someone who has gone nearly 24 years without it, I think I'm one of those people." Because Henry had not had sex yet, and because he believed that his sex life said something really important and essential about who he was, he believed that he was a lost cause, that he never would. But what if sex wasn't so important? What if it wasn't special or transcendent or dangerous? What if we let sex just be a thing that we did do, or that we didn't do, or that sometimes we did do and other times we didn't, and which was hopefully fun, but which didn't say anything particularly profound about the type of people that we were? Well, for one, it might make us more free to make the sexual choices that are right for us. It might make us feel more able to say yes to sexual opportunities that we would like to take up without fear that that would make us dirty or immoral, or that it would just change something about ourselves, about who we believed we were and who we believed that we could be. We'd probably also feel more able to say no to sexual encounters that we did not want, even if that meant that we ended up having less sex than we thought we should be having. And equally importantly, I think we'd also be a little less judgmental about other people's sexual choices, understanding that just because somebody has different values or different experiences than you do when it comes to sex, it doesn't mean that they are fundamentally different to you on a human level, and it certainly does not mean that they are lesser than you are. You probably won't be surprised to learn that the next time I heard from Henry, he was no longer a virgin, even though he thought he would be forever. And the most important thing that he learned from his experience was this thing that he had been carrying around with him that made him feel so bad about himself did not actually mean all that much after all. As he wrote in that email, "It didn't make me a better person, or even a different person, really. Nothing really changed." And that wasn't just because sex didn't transform Henry and make him better or make him whole. It's because he was never broken in the first place. Thank you very much.